Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Molly Riley. I am the Pearl Business and Advocacy Coordinator of Live in Haven River Now. I'll be moderating today's webinar, which is the second in our Reduce, Reuse, Recycle webinar series, organized in partnership with Environment Virginia, Clean Virginia Waterways, and Clean Fairfax. Over the course of this webinar series, we'll be looking at emerging solutions to reducing plastic pollution in our waterways, exploring fall solutions and issues with plastic recycling, and lastly, how Virginia is working to eliminate the most harmful single-use plastics. We'll be joined throughout the series by experts in the plastics-related waste management, policy, technical solutions, wildlife impacts, and industry solutions. You can register for the remaining webinar using the link shared in the chat, as well as check out the recording of the first webinar on Facebook. Our goal for today's webinar is to re-examine the common phrase, reduce, reuse, recycle. Oftentimes, when people think about plastic pollution, they jump straight to recycling as the answer while forgetting what comes first. Over the course of this series, we are digging into the questions of how can we better focus on reducing and reusing? Can we make the 3 R's even stronger? Is our focus on recycling doing more harm than good? How can we use the 3 R's to adopt comprehensive and cohesive policies and systems that move us towards a more circular economy? Today, we will dive into these questions and we'll be hearing from some great speakers. First, Christy Rhines, Recycling Coordinator, Department of Public Works and Waste Management for the City of Virginia Beach, will talk about issues localities are facing as they try to maintain recycling programs. Next, Charlie Forbes, Chief Recycling Compliance and Planning for Fairfax County Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, will talk about the challenges of recycling in Fairfax County. And lastly, Ellie Bomer-Wilson, Executive Director of Environment Virginia, will give an overview on chemical recycling and how this emerging topic in waste management distracts from our goal of reducing plastic pollution. We have a jam-packed agenda. We'll have a bit of time at the end for questions. You can ask questions in the Q&A section here in Zoom or using the Google Forms link shared in the chat. We will save any questions we do not get to and be sure to get answers to folks after the webinar. Thank you again for joining us. And now I will pass it over to our first speaker, Ms. Christy Rhines.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. The recycling realities is the topic that we're going to focus on, or I'll focus on here. As many of you all are aware, the City of Virginia Beach is entering into its last year of a recycling contract we've held for 5 years with a very long-standing recycling company. So where we're at currently is our contract will end in June 30, 2024. And we are in the first stages of trying to figure out what our citizens want in regards to recycling. It's important to us to listen to our residents, our citizens, whether they're homeowners or whether they live in apartment complexes or private communities, because everybody's voice matters in this and helping our city leadership to make their decision on what the future of recycling looks like for our city. So some of the challenges, our challenges are not unique to Virginia Beach in our region or in the Commonwealth as a whole, and probably not in the entire state, actually, or in the country. Some of those challenges that we face every day is poor quality of recyclables. So everybody knows that when you open up a blue cart, what's inside is either going to be the good stuff or it's just going to be bad stuff. And of course, that quality comes from education and just an awareness of what needs to go in those carts. One of the other challenges is inexpensive or inadequate services. You know, everything has gone up in cost, right? So we are all very well aware when we go to the grocery store, when we fill up our cars, what contracts are looking like for municipal governments. Everything costs a little more. And sometimes those services for what we're trying to ask of contractors isn't able to be provided because they don't have the ability to provide the service that localities may need. The other is low market demand for recycled materials. And that's something I think all of us in the recycling industry have faced over years. And we can, go back and say, well, China, but the reality is sometimes it's just the infrastructure hasn't been created or maintained in order to process the recyclables. Again, that goes back to poor quality of recycling in regards to the education that our residents have or what they perceive to be recycled. So one of the things that I always say is recycling is always a good idea, right? Reduction obviously is the first step that we would like to see everybody, but we live in a world of marketing and everybody believes that everything can be recycled. So recycling has long served to offset the high volume of household waste generated by our citizens. And from a municipal government and even from a private hauler standpoint, what we look for is diverting as much tonnage away from the trash waste stream and then taking that material and turn it into beneficial use. So we're taking a waste and turn it into a resource. The idea of that is, the back end of it does create jobs in the hauling, the processing, the selling of the remanufacturing of the recyclable. So everything has a loop, right? So we're creating jobs and that makes people feel good. And we're recycling more and that makes people feel good. So there comes the warm and fuzzy. But how much more warm and fuzzy could it get if you just stopped buying the items that you didn't need? I sat on a task force last year with DEQ, and one of the things I said is your waste is my problem. And that's ever so true in a municipal government, that everything that somebody buys, the citizens as a whole expect the local government to take care of their problem. They expect the landfill to be built. They expect the recycling to be picked up. They expect us to manage what they bought. And here is the reality. So we have a good idea of a recycling waste stream. Now in its current form is very imperfect. We used to have totes that sat at the curb. I used to love the totes because nobody recycled the wrong items, right? Because you didn't want to get publicly shamed for putting things into your open bin that your neighbors could see, or that were left behind because it was the wrong item. But once we went to 95-gallon carts, now I get to hide my bad recycling habits. So contamination increases. Again, here we come back into the educational resources, which we are lacking. Either local governments don't have the financial means to educate their citizens. We're in competition with, companies who like to greenwash and tell everybody it's recyclable. They love to put the Mobius loop on everything that's made. They love to put on there, my favorite is the plastic bags that say for recycling. And then we tell people don't put plastic bags in your recycling cart. So lack of enforcement, that's another issue that we have encountered. Probably the main one is lack of interest in doing better. Residents love to tell me in my position what should be recycled when I'm telling them why it can't be recycled. It has to have a buyer. If it doesn't have a buyer, it's trash. So competition for municipal contracts is falling very low on the end of things. People can make more money, especially in the Commonwealth of Virginia, hauling trash than hauling recyclables. And then you have the reprocessors for end use markets. There's less and less of those. More of those have gone overseas, and now there's trouble with getting the material, clean material, or even contaminated material to the processors for them to sort that material out and turn it into new products. The mixed messages, again, going back to the education component, I feel like I'm going to harp on that a little bit today. I gave a presentation last week to one of our council members' community meetings, and somebody asked me, well, how am I supposed to know what can be recycled? I don't know that we can make it any easier than putting it on the lid of the recycling carts, and that's exactly where they find what goes in that blue bin, yet nobody reads the message. I get asked to come up with stickers and decals that they could put on their carts when, again, it's printed on the lid of their carts. They just don't read it. So this is one of the campaigns we ran recently, which just simplifies it, tells you what it is, gives you some pictures. It's bright and colorful, kind of comes at you pretty hard. And it gives you permission that if it's something that can't be recycled, it's okay to throw it in the trash. It's okay. Like, I want people to be okay with that. We have limited outreach and education opportunities. It's, when I go to speak at civic leagues or garden clubs, it's not overly well attended. It's, maybe 10 people at most, and I can only reach, I have a population of 450,000 people. So it's very hard to reach that 10 people at a time. Again, going back to limited citizen interest, residents want don't really want a locality, their local government telling them what they can and can't do. And then we have wishful recyclers, those ones that mean well, but sometimes are creating more of a problem by putting the wrong items in their container, but they just don't realize that that's contaminating the actual waste stream. Recycling quality, again, going back to, China having been the primary destination for the majority of recyclables from the US. We always tell our residents, don't waste a resource to clean a resource, meaning I don't really want people like running water or putting cans into a dishwasher just so that they're pretty and pristine when they go in the recycle container. And China doesn't really want stuff like you see in this cart going to them. So if every bit of that ended up in a bale of material headed for a port in China, it's going to get rejected immediately. And it's clear to see why. Whereas I have one resident who does an amazing job at recycling, I have another resident, to them, that's a second trash cart. This is impacts. What we do, what we place to the curb has a global impact, and how well we are at our recycling programs has a global impact. So it's incredibly important that the quality of the recycling that we see be cleaned up, and that have, public participation, that residents all grab a hold of this and do it well. So this leads the previous slide probably gives a good indication of where we are as far as our residue or our trash numbers. So on the average, the national average for non-recyclables in a recycling cart is 13.7. We in Virginia Beach are 43, almost 44%. And this is a consistent number we've seen over the last probably 10 years or more. And what that is again, not every bit of it, is, pizza and, just actual trash. Some of it's just the wrong items. Some of it's, where they put butter tubs or yogurt tubs into those containers. That's contamination, that's trash, that's residue. And hence it hits that bottom number. It could be as easy as the plastic bags that we keep telling people to return to the grocery store. But again, every wrong item adds to that residue number. And the cost for recycling increases because of the contamination that we're seeing in this, and that's driving up overall prices as a whole. Going back to expensive and inadequate services, in order for a recycling program to be effective, there has to be somebody that's willing to process the material, willing to buy the material, and that we have the financial support for the contracted services. Also, one of the things that we benefit from on the coastal side of Virginia is that we have access to all intermodal transportation. So we have rail, we have rivers, we have, ports, and interstates. It gives us an opportunity to be better and maintaining contracts that we have, because we have the accessibility to all means of transportation to get these items to a material recovery facility for processing in end-use markets. And of course, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but the recycling process is pretty simple. I like to look at it as kind of a closed loop, not quite on the scale that we like to refer to it as, but you'd be amazed how many people don't realize how this works. That you toss something into the recycling cart, a hauler, contracted hauler picks it up, it heads to a sorting facility where then it goes off to a reprocessor and then goes to end market, and then it comes back. I often give the example of, we buy a TV, it comes in cardboard, you recycle the cardboard, it's picked up, it's sorted, it goes to a reprocessor, it goes back to an end market, and sometimes later, you're probably going to buy that cardboard box back from China. So services and fees, this is where we are currently in Virginia Beach. So this is the current pricing we have. And so we have about 125,000 homes that receive monthly curbside recycling services, and the cost per home per month right now on our contract is $2.93. We have the lowest curbside recycling rate of any other municipality in the Commonwealth. We locked in when it was a really good deal, and we know that good deals don't stay long, so we're expecting that the rates will increase. Our contract also covers all of the oceanfront, all of our city buildings, all of our city parks, fire stations, all police precincts. We also maintain 2 recycling centers, and our recycling centers each week pull about 10 tons. And that's 10 tons of clean material that residents themselves have pre-sorted, brought to our facility for recycling. They brought it to us. And for $5.48 per ton, I can take that material over to a recovery facility and have it processed. The annual price for our citywide recycling services is $4.66 million right now. And again, like I explained earlier, our contract ends in June 30, 2024. And that leads us to what we're trying to educate our residents on, is understanding that we're not getting rid of a recycling program, like local media likes to say, because it's a good headline. But the reality is that we have to let our residents know ahead of time that the cost will increase. In waste management and public works waste management, we are an enterprise fund. We don't operate off the city's general fund. And as such, we can operate similar to a business, but with that comes the increased cost of services. So looking overall at contracts that have come up probably here in the last year or so, we've noticed the increase of $3 to $4 per house and a per ton cost for processing. And then also looking at localities that collect their own and they process it themselves. So it gives us an opportunity to understand what's out there. And of course, as naturally one would expect, all eyes are on what our next contract will look like. And the options that we're allowing our residents, we're asking our residents to select from is, do the services that we have currently stay the same? Do we eliminate curbside service altogether and increase the number of recycling drop-off centers? Do we develop an opt-in, opt-out recycling program, which would be similar to like a subscription program? And then option 4 has asked our residents to come up with creative options. Though I can sit here all day and I can look at all the, online, I can read all the publications for waste and recycling and see what everybody across the country is doing, what localities are doing. It's very important that we have public input on this and that we ask the residents, is there something we didn't think of? Did you visit someplace overseas and they were doing it a little bit differently than what you see here? And if that's a good option, then give it to us, because we want to look at it. We want to. So as we get ready to put our RFP out on the streets, I like to say we're casting a wide net. So we're not trying to ask a hauler to do what's always been done. We're asking the haulers to come up with creative solutions to manage a contract that's a very large contract, a lucrative contract for most, that has a guaranteed amount of tonnage, and work with us in that and the opportunity to educate our residents so that we have cleaner recyclables. And as everybody on this call probably is aware of, that the Virginia mandates the localities recycle 25% of their household waste. We as a I think there's about 17 localities that fall underneath HRPDC, which is Hampton Road Planning District. We pull all our numbers together so that we can meet that number. We meet it alone just in Virginia Beach off what we recycle at our own landfill. We have a landfill and resource recovery center, and we recycle everything from metals to taking trees and things like that and turn them into mulch. So we're able to claim those as recyclables. Some of the challenges that we have is looking at maybe an opportunity for regionalism. The regionalism idea would be, say, for instance, the city of Norfolk's contracts coming up the same time as our contracts coming up. So is there an opportunity for 2 localities to work together on one contract? And again, it goes in it, as everybody may be aware of. Chesapeake also does not currently have a curbside recycling contract. So again, it looks at, opportunities to expand what we are able to accomplish with other localities. And then, of course, our public input. The city, based off City Council's recommendation, is Speak Up BB, which is going to look at engaging our citizens and encourages them to ask questions, share their suggestions for the future of what recycling looks like. By no means are we ever looking to get rid of recycling. We recognize our sustainability, our impact in the overall, just in numbers alone of participation, we recognize that our citizens want something like this, and it's important to us to have their voices added to this, because it will help our our city council and our city manager to make decisions on what our program looks like moving forward. Our surveys will open October the 2nd. They'll close through November the 17th. And shortly following that, that information will be gathered up and shared online. So if anybody's interested in seeing the questions that we have, you can go to speakupbb.com/recycling. Take a look at the questions that have already been asked. I believe that they're getting ready to post up our citywide contract, which is the current contract, because we get a lot of questions asking for that. As well as what our residue rates look like and how much material is actually being recycled. And with that, thank you all very much. Sorry, I see a question. Do you want to wait till the end to me answer those, or is it easier to do now?
We're going to hold questions till the
Okay.
end, and we'll direct them at whoever they were for. So a reminder to attendees, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your questions. And there's also the link to the Google form that collects questions as well in the chat. And thank you so much, Christy, for your presentation. And with that, we'll be moving on to hear from Mr. Charlie Forbes.
Hey, everybody. We're doing well this fine Thursday. Yeah, my name's Charlie, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges for plastics recycling in Fairfax County. And like my friend Christy was just telling us, there are challenges. There are also, there are challenges, and I think like Christy was saying too, a lot of those challenges are very local, because local governments as independent individuals have to take on the challenge. And so as probably the biggest municipality in Virginia, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Fairfax County has seen. And I'll just go to the next slide and let's dive right in. There's a little slide that's just going to overview some of the things I'm going to talk about, not in that particular order, but certainly a review of the challenges. I'm going to blow through the bits of my presentation that Christy's already covered. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what I think is an important part of this, which are meaningful benefits that might be overlooked because they're not on a balance sheet. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the distinction between, outreach and education and what it actually takes to engage the public, and also the dirty word in our game, which is enforcement, and the degree to which Fairfax County is starting to approach that. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about adapting to the market realities. And my joke, of course, is, as you can see here, is I'm going to talk about one of our programs that we developed and implemented that kind of proved an old adage that I've always believed in recycling business, which is if you build it, they will come. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. This slide is more of a humorous thing than an attempt to communicate information. The title says it's all. Solid waste management in general and recycling in particular is complicated. There's a lot of different materials going a lot of different places and going through a lot of different processes to get to the point where it can actually be turned into something. And this is just an illustration of the point. Just showing what material flow looks like for Fairfax County, at least. Next slide. And yeah, there are constraints, and Christy has talked about them. And while some of the things I'm going to talk about today are not specific to plastic, they're nonetheless applicable, and there's practical constraints. The reality is that by choosing to throw everything into one bin, what they call single stream recycling, there are advantages to that, but it also constrains us to a large degree in what some of our options are. We're fighting against a world that's full of single-use plastics, or single-use items generally, and at least in my general opinion, I don't have the scientific data to back this. You're not going to see a lot of numbers from me today, by the way, folks, and that might work for me. It might work against me, but it's not because I don't like numbers. But the truth is that, at least in my neck of the woods, most of the single-use items I see are plastic. And but there are other contaminants, and those are constrained. When you go in a single stream world, it's easy for one man's recyclable to become another man's contaminant. Yeah, like Christy said, there are confusing and even sometimes conflicting messages. I think it's also fair to say that the non-residential side of the house and multifamily properties bring with them their own specific constraints. We've seen the world, viewed the world, and kind of built recycling systems around single-family homes, and everybody trundles their stuff out to the bottom of the garden gate and out onto the curb, and that's the end of that. But as we all know, and ironically, the lion's share of the waste that we're trying to manage or recycle comes from non-residential sources. It comes from commercial and industrial sources, retail and such, and apartment complexes. As my friend Christy also said, there are limited resources for outreach and enforcement. And so part of the challenge and some of the things I want to talk about today, we'll talk about some ideas in terms of how to maximize the impact of those things, acknowledging that they are definitely a constraint. Not having enough money is probably the local government's favorite hymn, and Fairfax County is no different. Much like my friend from Virginia Beach, our solid waste management program is also an enterprise-funded organization. So we don't use any tax dollars to do what we do. We charge money to our users, and that money is what we use to do what we do. Something else that I thought was worth mentioning as a constraint to the recycling industry in Virginia is statutory authority. Virginia is not unique in this, but somewhat unusual in that its legal construct only allows municipal governments to do the things that the General Assembly in Richmond explicitly says it can do. And moreover, that General Assembly, it's relatively easy to greatly influence that General Assembly to represent the interests of who you represent. And as a result of that, you see some interesting constraints, and there are some very specific constraints related to recycling. More especially, full disclosure, you're talking to a guy with a fair amount of enforcement background. While recycling while the requirement to recycle is a part of the criminal code, in reality, in Virginia, municipalities do not have the statutory authority to prosecute them as a criminal matter. And they're also limited in what the maximum civil penalty can be. So if an organization chooses not to recycle, I can't charge them a lot of money for their decision to do that. I think the other constraint, and this goes back to, again, what you've already heard, which is there are struggles with outreach and engaging the public. And again, the constraint is reaching and influencing the right people. I'm going to try and talk a little bit about most of this stuff as we go forward. I think, and this is just my view, but I do think that the top 5 challenges are what you see listed on the screen. For those of you that I'm addicted to acronyms, so I'll own that one. Extended producer responsibility is the concept of saying that when you produce a product, the final disposition of the packaging is your responsibility. It shouldn't be that municipal government sits at the end of the pipeline having to catch the flow and figure out what to do with it. Some of this stuff, there's no reason, at least in my mind, and I'll be provocative here, there's no reason in my mind why Amazon can't take back all the cardboard boxes that they send me, rather than having to put it through the machines that Christy was showing you, the machinations and the money to get it back into a cardboard box. Why can't you take the cardboard box back? Right? Available markets, again, definitely an issue. Overdependence on overseas markets, definitely a bad habit that the United States acquired. But the China situation has taught some lessons. I think that industry has, and the U.S. economy and industrial capability has and continues to flex towards generating more available markets in a financial and in a technical feasibility standpoint. But definitely it's a challenge. You got to find something nearby. I can't, from Fairfax County, Virginia, ship my stuff to Japan cheaply, right? The There are technology limitations. Again, hearkening back a little to the extended producer responsibility. Why do we have to have 7 different types of plastic? Are there good reasons for that? And especially, why are we allowing industry to manufacture things out of material when there may be limits to the technology for recycling them? Again, those are challenges that I see applying not only to plastics, of course, but again across the board, and that's true for pretty much everything I'm going to say today. Public participation, you're absolutely right. You know, people, it's not everybody that recycles. Fairfax County's view is that they should, and that there are greater good and greater public benefits to be realized from public participation. It is a challenge. I'm sure that others might not necessarily agree with my statement, but I'm happy to make that statement that there's a belief in among the folks that are leading the Fairfax County operation that if you give people a big enough recycling can and a big enough trash can, and you explain to them in ways that they can understand exactly what needs to happen, it's certainly been my experience that when that person is standing in front of a trash can and a recycling bin and they understand where this thing goes, they care enough about where it goes to put it where it's supposed to be. And I think the challenge, again, for us as public servants is to set up systems that facilitate ease of use for the public, or ease of proper use, perhaps. But definitely, it's a challenge, no question. And then finally, you see here that in my opinion, the top 5 includes operational costs. Hey, folks, recycling isn't cheap. And when China shut its doors to us, we all learned that pretty quickly. And I think that is something that we need to do a better job communicating to the public and to our decision makers and legislators that the cost of our choices are not limited to how much money we can save by not collecting something or by collecting it. Ultimately, we need to have a real full life cycle, full cost accounting, and that is a challenge, getting a true sense of the operating costs. Next slide, please. Again, like I said right up front, I think there are also many important tangible benefits. And again, this is true of all recycling, not just plastic recycling, but for sure, there are important tangible benefits to having effective recycling programs that don't show up on the balance sheet. And they might not even show up significantly in an annual report on recycling. And the slide again lists them. I'll, in the interest of time, leaving us with enough time, plenty time for other speakers and for us to engage in some good discussion about any questions that are being posed from the audience. You see what they are. You know, if we give people an easy to understand and effective way to put their waste somewhere else, we see these benefits coming forward, and there's hard data to support it in terms of what we've seen with improved outreach, education, enforcement, engagement, and improved capacity. We see less contamination in our waterways, less litter in the community. We actually see, and less cost to address all that stuff, which of course translates into reduced taxes. It extends the life of our system. It reduces air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. Again, I'm preaching to the choir with a lot of this, I'm sure. I think the other thing that I've experienced and demonstrated firsthand is that if you pile it up clean and high enough, somebody will come along and want to do something with it to make a nickel, and that's again a benefit. But it is having aggressive and progressive and to the greatest degree possible, innovative recycling programs and being willing to look at new ways to overcome the challenges I've been talking about. What comes along with that sometimes is increased interest from the market. Oh, you're doing that? Oh, well, can I buy that from you? And I'll talk a little bit about an example of that in a minute. And again, actually, that all feeds to the last slide, right? That sometimes just piling the stuff up in a state that somebody could use it for another purpose is enough to generate entrepreneurship that we never saw coming. And I'll talk a little bit again about an example of that in a minute. And it can also generate local materials markets right next to you. Just because if you build a high enough pile of it, somebody will build a factory to use that pile. Anyway, I think all of these things are benefits that matter. And certainly the Fairfax County community has told us pretty clearly that these are the benefits, some of the benefits that they want. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about for the rest of these slides is going to be about our attempt to respond to that demand. Next slide, please. Trying to go from the global of what applies to plastic applies to everybody. Some of the things that I see improving plastics recycling, but again, also generally, the Commonwealth gave us the statutory authority to impose a bag tax, and we promptly did so, and it is having an impact for sure. It's really fascinating to me, continues to be fascinating to me, that if you put a nickel on a plastic bag or a nickel on a bottle of Coke, it changes people's behavior. We would not stop in the street to pick up a nickel, but we will fill our garage with boxes of bottles so we can take them somewhere and get those nickels back. It's really interesting. And the bag tax is realizing the kind of benefits. And again, remember what I said a minute ago about litter and streams and that. Less people taking less bags means a better world and actually reduced costs to deal with all the problems when you don't take these kind of steps. ZW is my acronym for zero waste. The county has applied zero waste to public procurement. So now we're starting to look at purchasing decisions and be a bit more aggressive and a bit more sophisticated in looking at what are the waste implications related to making purchases. So it's not just the cheapest game in town. Low bid does not necessarily win all. Green bid might win all. Some other things we're doing, and I think again probably more plastic centric than a lot of things. We amended our health regulations to encourage what I don't know what the real term of art is for this. I use this phrase, food retail shareware. This is the idea that instead of food vendors and food retail outlets using disposable clamshells and containers for the food that they sell, that they instead use something that could be reused. And there are technologies and organizations and businesses that are thriving around the idea of taking, instead of you getting your expanded polystyrene, your sandwich in an expanded polystyrene clamshell box, you get it in a box that you can bring back to the retailer, and the retailer piles it up, and there's a vendor that comes along behind the restaurant and takes them all away and washes them and gives them back to you. That stuff's actually happening in various places in the country, and it's happening in a technically and an economically feasible way, and Fairfax County is trying to lay the groundwork to make that possible by getting the health regs to not get in the way of that idea. That by health regs, I mean the regulations that regulate restaurants and food service. Strategic shift towards sectors that may have been somewhat neglected. The truth of the matter is we've done our fair share of handing out coloring books and refrigerator magnets, but there's a lot of evidence to show, at least in Fairfax County, that we've not done much to engage people that we've not necessarily broadcast this and reached and hit all of the targets we would want to hit with our information and our call to action. We're shifting towards sectors that we feel have been somewhat neglected. And frankly, some of that, of course, is what I was talking about: commercial sector, multifamily housing, something other than single family residents who we've been pelting with stickers and magnets and gimmies of all kinds for years now. Start doing a lot more of that in the sectors that didn't see that much action. And as I see here in the bullet here, you'll see also shifting towards some of the more vulnerable and underserved communities. That for Fairfax County means, printing content and distributing content and disseminating information in languages other than English. Again, we've had some measurable impact by doing things like putting advertisements in bus shelters in Spanish, just to connect the people that are standing in bus shelters with a message that otherwise might be meaningless to them because they don't have strong English skills. Another example that I'll mention is just putting people on our posters and on our materials that look like the people we're trying to reach. There's no sense in having a lot of photographs of me. I don't need any more information about recycling. Some other people do, I think. And then finally, in terms of education outreach, you know, again, the community, we've done a great job. Local governments all over this country have done a really fabulous job pushing out an incredible amount of information on what to do, why to do it that way, and so on. The simple truth is that we find Fairfax County concludes, and I think a lot of communities are starting to look at it and say, let's get away from the information-centric approach. We've gotten as much as we can out of putting yet another flyer or yet another coloring book or refrigerator magnet in somebody's hands, and start thinking about where the world is going and where impact and changing public behavior lies in things like community-based social marketing, that's the CBSM, and social media. For an old codger like me, I'm just stunned at the fact that most people live their entire life now through their phone. They pay their bills, they talk to their family, they do all the things in social media. And I think we need to meet those people where they are, where they go, and get the message to them there. Next slide. Again, I mentioned up front a little earlier, you know, looking at where the next steps are, where are we going next? I think we're going towards sort of the idea of integrating outreach from related themes. I mean, there's a lot of, it's a complicated soup, like the chart, the silly chart I showed with all those things going on. And like I said, also, our enforcement has largely been complaint driven. I think the next steps is to get away from that and get to be more proactive, to do scheduled and do the kind of things the health department does in restaurants for public health issues, right? Get ahead of the game, regular inspections, direct accountability, and holding people accountable and at every level and in every sector. Collaborating with all the other people that can have a big impact on how well a recycling program goes. Planning and design, you know, when people come in with their plans for the next, you know, a block of apartment buildings, does that apartment building design really leave enough room for the reality of the needs of a modern recycling program? We all grew up with that little 16 or 18 gallon toter that you put out that was cool, but I know I got 2 95-gallon cans at my house, and the recycling one fills up first. So we need to think about that when we're building our housing and building our capacity and designing, allowing the private sector to design and build the homes and businesses of the future. The health department, like I just said, you know, we're talking about restaurants and trying to alter behaviors in restaurants. Health departments regulate them. Why don't we talk to our friends there? Other public works functions is what I'm putting in here too. I happen to belong to a county with the Department of Public Works that's fairly muscular and covers a whole lot of ground in a whole lot of areas. And there are recycling or solid waste management related opportunities that would come with coordination and collaboration with these other organizations. Leveraging what I'm talking about there when I talk about leveraging other meaningful and popular initiatives. I chose the word popular carefully because, again, much of these things that have been done in the county have come from the ground up. You know, the county CCAP stands for, I think it's called Community Energy and Climate Action Plan. There is a groundswell demand for the county to be more intelligent with respect to energy use and climate impacting operations. And again, solid waste, we're not the solution to the climate problem, but we're one of the oars in the water. So we're in the canoe now with our climate friends, and we're going to paddle as hard as they are to try and get things to go the right way. Litter task force, you know, the county formed a task force that really tried to examine the problem, the sources, and the possible solutions for litter. Okay, I'm sorry, I guess I'm running really long. So I'll just say there's the slides, and these are the kinds of things that we've got going on. What's the next slide? There's definitely one slide I absolutely need everybody to hear. I'm going to cut the next 3 slides down to this idea that if you build it, you will come. The glass market went away. Nobody's recycling glass. Nobody wants to buy glass. let's get out of the glass business. And I think most communities in the country actually abandoned accepting glass as recyclable, and that was a reasonable decision by all means. Fairfax County decided to look at it from a slightly different point of view, and part of my preach is be the market. So we go out and we buy crushing and screening equipment, and we put up this bunch of purple colored boxes for dropping off glass. Full credit belongs to the organization called Ripple Glass out of Kansas City rather, who you know, they invented this idea and make a living out of it. I talked to these people and they were happy to work with us and let us steal their color and steal a lot of their messaging. And like the slide says, everybody said that's not going to work. And now we have more demand for containers than we can actually service. Next slide. Tonnage is just going up every year. Some of that picture is impacted by the pandemic and stuff like that. But the simple truth of it is we went from, we can't do nothing with glass, let's take it out of the program, to now we are being contacted by industry who want to come to our facility, pick up our glass on their dime, give us a check for it, and then haul it back to wherever they need to make bottles with it, to make, you know, glass fiber with it, all sorts of stuff. So you can't turn it around if you're aggressive and you're willing to kind of think outside the box. Next slide, please. Again, I'm just going to leave the slide up, and you can see these are the kind of things that what's on deck for the county in terms of our aggressive pursuit of opportunities. I apologize for running long and for not being able to talk to some of this stuff through in a lot of detail. But the bottom one is probably an important message I would definitely want to leave you to, and that is to pivot emphasis towards source reduction. Recycling alone won't solve our problems. We need to figure out how to get people to make less waste in the first place. Next slide, please. This is without doubt my best accomplishment in recycling. When I was at one time ran the county landfill, this fella ended up in my office, and he is something that was bound to be at the landfill, and now he takes up that post pretty regularly. And if you can recycle young Lenny here, you can recycle anything, I see. I think that was my last slide. I'm more than happy to field any questions today, and of course I encourage anybody taking this in that wants more information or wants to take, you know, wants to basically say, well, hey, here's my problems, your solutions don't fit. I'm happy to spend time talking to anybody who wants to try and take on any kind of solid waste management challenge, more especially one that makes for less solid waste to challenges. And with that, I thank you all for your time, and I apologize for running long, and I'll hang out until you tell me to go home. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Charlie. We appreciate so much you being here. Lastly, we're going to have Ellie talk about emerging topic in waste management called chemical recycling. Ellie?
Thank you, Molly. Yes, my name is Ellie Beamer-Wilson. I am the State Director for Environment Virginia. We are a statewide environmental organization working to protect our air, water, and special places. And plastic pollution deals with all three of those things. When it comes to plastic pollution, an emerging topic in that is chemical recycling now. So I'm going to give the quick 101 on what the deal with chemical recycling is and why it's actually a false solution to our plastic pollution crisis. So we can go to the next slide. So before I talk about chemical recycling, I just want to share a few of these numbers in terms of how much plastic we're actually producing, how much we're projected to produce, and then how much is recycled of that. We are producing and using an incredible amount of plastic. Since 1956, that's 11 billion metric tons of plastic has been produced. Only 9% of that being recycled is not good enough for having plastics for this long. Plastics recycling has not done what we want it to do. And so this new term of chemical recycling has started to pop up as a solution to be able to improve this plastic recycling rate. as what's been mentioned before, the most important way that we can reduce plastic pollution in our environment is to actually cut it at the source. So no specific recycling technology will solve plastic pollution in our environment as it is, but we also have concerns about chemical recycling in that it doesn't actually recycle anything and doesn't create a circular economy in a closed loop. So we can go to the next slide. This is a little, I can't actually think, word map thing on some of the terms used in chemical recycling. So you will hear it be called chemical conversion, advanced recycling, plastics to fuel is another way of describing it. So I put this up just to say that this is an umbrella term of a few different types of technology. So you can go to the next slide for a very detailed definitions. We'll share in the chat a link to the PIRG website, which actually this is taken from, and you can read through what all the different technologies that are used in chemical recycling, what they are. As you will see, most of these do not actually result in new plastic. So when I say that this isn't really recycling, it's because you're not taking plastic and turning it like a plastic bottle and turning it back into a plastic bottle, which you're able to do with something like an aluminum can. So most of this product is being turned into something other than a plastic product. So you can go to the next slide, and I think that actually shows this process a little bit better. Our friends at Clean Fairfax put together this image and shows what those processes, the end points of them are. So fuel that's burned, chemicals that are used as additives to different fuels that are burned, or downgraded plastic. And that just speaks to the difficulties of recycling plastic, that it is really difficult to get a one-to-one, even recycling product. And this process does not achieve that any better than mechanical recycling does. So you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to go through all the problems in a little bit more detail with chemical recycling and why it is really not a solution to our waste crisis. And I'll just talk to them as we get to them. So you can go to the next slide. And I think it's the most important. It doesn't recycle very much. So we're not actually having the end product turn into another plastic product. So the whole point of recycling is to create a closed loop system where you're able to create a recyclable product that then can be recycled again at the end of its life. Well, that's not actually happening all of that often. So while mechanical recycling over the last 75 years has failed to increase the amount of their recycling rates, so only 9%, this technology does not give us much more hope in achieving higher numbers. So it's usually, like I said, turned into a fuel product. So you can go to the next slide then. And that talks more about the impacts of chemical recycling. So chemical recycling is 10 to 100 times worse for the environment than using virgin plastic. That just makes it altogether unsustainable going forward. We want something that actually benefits the environment when thinking about waste. And by using this process between the chemicals that are used, the process of actually turning the plastic into their end product, it's very energy intensive and creates a lot of waste. So it's really not that sustainable to be doing for our environment. And then 86 to 99% of the plastic sent to chemical recycling facilities is used for fuel or energy rather than new recyclable products. So while it wouldn't be considered incineration because of a lack of oxygen when turning it into that fuel, burning essentially turning plastic into fuel and then burning that is incineration at the end of the day. It's just a really long way to get to it and a really expensive and inefficient, energy inefficient way to get to that. So it's actually better for the environment to use virgin plastic, which we know contributes to more plastic pollution. We can go to the next slide. And I think this is the most important one. It takes money from proven solutions. It is worse for the environment than virgin plastic, and it's also more expensive than virgin plastic. We had heard earlier, if there's not a market for it at the end and it doesn't have much value, it's really not something we should be focused on. Rather than investing in our recycling systems and things like glass recycling or aluminum recycling, other types of mechanical recycling, instead of requiring producers to produce plastic products that are types of plastic that we can actually manage at the end of the life or reduce the amount they use altogether to create a circular economy, chemical recycling is a linear materials economy. At the end of the day, that plastic or that fuel being burned isn't going to be turned back into a plastic bottle ever. And I think that's a really important way to distinguish whether it's a real solution or not. And if it leads us to a circular economy, it is more in line with being a real solution. And this just fails to do that. We can go to the next slide. So what can we do? Well, first we can reduce plastic production and follow proven solutions. Places that have bottle deposit programs have less litter. Places that have extended producer responsibility laws have higher waste diversion rates and have higher recycling rates. So these are solutions that are happening across the country, across the world, really. And we can follow suit here in Virginia to push for those proven solutions rather than thinking that this is going to be something other than it is. It's important to distinguish between mechanical and chemical recycling. They are not the same, and it's important for regulators to regulate in that way. And we should always consider the full environmental impacts of a process that is meant to improve our environment. We should not be doing a process that is more energy intensive, has more waste, and causes more pollution than a process that does not. And we really need more transparency and data regarding these facilities. It is very difficult to know their full impacts with the lack of information that we currently have regarding them. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you so much. We do have more time for questions here at the end, just a few, but here's my contact information regarding this. Feel free to reach out to me. So if you have anything from my presentation that you'd like me to clarify or want more information, we've also been sharing some resources in the chat that you can check out that really dive into this issue. So thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you, Ellie, for that super interesting overview. Now, I just want to remind folks to register for our final webinar in this series if you have not done so. We'll be joined by Mark Swingle of the Virginia Aquarium to discuss plastic pollution impacts on Virginia's environment, as well as take a look at Virginia's progress on eliminating the most harmful types of single-use plastic. As Ellie mentioned, we're also sharing resources and actions in the chat. So if you haven't already, please check them out to learn more and get more involved. We'll include these in a follow-up email along with how you can watch recordings of this webinar. So we have a little bit of time for questions. I see that Christy and Charlie have done a great job answering a lot of questions in the chat already, but we do have one that I just wanted to highlight regarding the narrative about industry narrative frequently claims that the chemical recycling is a component of a circularity and circular economy. Is this accurate? This is from an anonymous attendee. And I guess, Ellie, that'd be the best person to answer that one.
No, it is not. It would not be considered a part of a circular economy because it doesn't have the closed loop that we're looking for, particularly since most of what is created is fuel. When you burn the fuel, it's done. I mean, it's in our environment, then it's harming our climate. It is not being used as another product. And that's what the problem with that is and why we wouldn't consider recycling. It does not create a circular economy or a circular loop with the product.
Thank you, Ellie. So it doesn't look like we have any. Oh, maybe we have one more come in. Okay, from Hannah, we have, is wish cycling a big problem in Virginia, or is the majority of recycling content correct? How can we improve this? Would Charlie or Christy like to take this?
I can jump on that one pretty easily. In our region, we see wishful recycling as a huge problem, actually. It's probably Without having the actual data, I'd probably guess 90% of the confusion that residents have with what can be recycled. And they get that information from, having worked private sector. I used to work for a recycling company, and, I'd go through the plant. If you ever take a tour of a recycling facility, you'll see this immediately. And you look at items that are, might be, a car part, and you can't understand why it's recycled, but it's metal. And you see Barbies and plastic toys. Well, they're plastic, right? So in their minds, they think, the homeowner, the recycler thinks, well, I don't know what to do with it, so I'm going to put it in this container. And then somebody will figure out what to do with it. Or it's almost the other end of that is where they know it's not recyclable. They know it's not on the list of things that locality accepts, but they're going to put it in there anyways because they expect the locality to forcibly get somebody to buy that material. And that's just not how the recycling programs work. Recycling programs are successful when you have buyers for the material that is being accepted, and what is being accepted is based on those buyers themselves and who has an actual stake in the success of your programs, which is why you see that commonality across the entire country of what can and can't be recycled. But the wishful recycler is absolutely a thing that we manage day in, day out. I almost cringe a little bit when somebody says, I recycle everything, because that everything to me is alarming in the sense that I think, well, you're putting things in that container that probably aren't accepted in our curbside program. So in turn, you're adding to the residue rate or that trash rate, that material that's actually getting thrown into a landfill. And how do we improve it? Education, really just getting down with people. I love a one-on-one. One of our recycling drop-off centers, we're able to interact with residents in that realm, and they learn, they're educated one-on-one. But again, in localities that have large populations like we have, it is very hard to get in the face of 450,000 and residents, and even through our partnership with Ask HR Green, which is local here in Virginia Beach. We have media buys, we have commercials, we have social media ads that run trying to educate people, and yet the message still doesn't hit everyone. So it's a consistent problem. Probably if I had my wish list, I would like to see the recovery facilities improve equipment to grab those items out that really should not be in there. But great question. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christy, for that answer. That is unfortunately all the time that we have for today.
Oh, dang.
So thank you all for joining us. We do have, again, the Google link. There's a Google form link in the chat. If we didn't get to your question or you have something popped in your head, please use that to send off a question to us, and we will get back to you. But thank you so much for joining. We'll be sending up a follow-up email with the resources and links to these recordings, and we appreciate you spending time with us today, and we'll see you next week for our final webinar in this series. Thank you so much for coming.